Refugee family asks Keanu Reeves for help. Next day, they find a new home. The air was crisp and cool as the city streets bustled with life. People hurried past without noticing the family standing near the corner, their faces worn with exhaustion, their hands clutching a sign that read in bold, desperate letters. "Keanu Reeves, please help us." Lena tightened her grip on the sign, feeling the rough cardboard press against her fingers. Her two daughters, Sarah and Amal, stood beside her, their eyes scanning the passers-by, searching for kindness in faces that barely spared them a glance. Kareem, her youngest, clung to her coat, his small hands ice-cold. "Mama, I'm hungry," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the honking cars and murmuring pedestrians. "I know, Habibi," she murmured, bending down to kiss his forehead. "Just a little longer." For weeks, they had been living in shelters, struggling to make ends meet. They had escaped a war-torn country, hoping for a better future, only to find themselves stuck in the same cycle of fear and uncertainty. Lena had tried everything, contacting aid organizations, applying for jobs, but with no permanent address, no local work experience, and little English, doors closed on her before they could even open. That's when Sarah had come up with an idea. "Everyone loves Keanu Reeves," she had said one night, her voice filled with the kind of hope only children dare to hold on to. "He's one of the nicest people in the world. Maybe if he sees us, he'll help." At first, Lena had dismissed it as a fantasy. But when she saw how many stories there were of Keanu helping strangers, donating money, giving his time, changing lives, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was their one chance. A kind stranger, a young woman in a scarf, stopped in front of them, looking at the sign. Her expression softened, and she pulled out her phone. "Can I take a picture?" she asked gently. "I want to share this online." Lena hesitated, but Sarah, full of determination, nodded eagerly. The woman smiled and took the picture, capturing their hopeful faces beneath the city lights. "I'll post it on Twitter and Instagram. A lot of people follow Keanu Reeves. If anyone can get his attention, it's the internet." Lena whispered a soft thank you as the woman walked away. Hours passed. The streets grew colder. Their sign drooped from exhaustion, much like their bodies. Lena was about to gather her children and head back to the shelter when Sarah's phone, an old donated one, buzzed with a notification. She gasped. "Mama, the picture, it's going viral." Lena's heart pounded as she peered over Sarah's shoulder. The post had already gained tens of thousands of likes and retweets. People from all over the world were commenting, tagging Keanu Reeves, pleading for him to see. "Keanu, if you see this, please help them. If anyone would do something, it's Keanu. Human kindness still exists. Let's make sure they're taken care of." Sarah's eyes were bright with excitement. "Do you think he'll see it?" Lena's breath hitched as she whispered, "I don't know, Habibi. But maybe, just maybe." Far across the city, in a quiet corner of a small cafe, Keanu Reeves scrolled through his phone, sipping a black coffee. He was used to seeing his name tagged in posts, usually memes or film discussions, but something about this one made him pause. A woman, 3 children, a sign bearing his name. He clicked on the post, reading the flood of comments urging him to help. His brows furrowed as he looked at the photo. Their eyes, there was something in them he recognized. A kind of exhaustion that ran deeper than the body. A kind of hope that barely clung to existence. He set down his coffee, his mind already made up. He pulled up a number on his phone and called his assistant. "Find them," he said, "and tell them help is on the way." The city lights flickered in the distance as Lena sat with her children near the shelter's entrance, wrapping Kareem in a thin blanket to keep him warm. The viral post had given them hope, but she knew better than to expect miracles. She had seen kindness in strangers before, but promises often faded with the sunrise. Sarah, however, was still buzzing with excitement, refreshing her phone every few minutes. "Mama, people keep sharing it. Look, another 5,000 likes." Her voice was hopeful, but Lena only offered a weak smile. "That's good, Habibi," she said softly, trying not to let her doubts show. Then, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Lena straightened, instinctively pulling her children closer. The car was sleek, expensive, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in front of a homeless shelter. The door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out, scanning the area before his eyes landed on them. He approached with careful steps, his hands tucked into his coat as he crouched to Lena's level. "Lena," he asked, his voice calm, professional. She hesitated. "Yes?" The man smiled gently. "My name is Michael. I work with Keanu Reeves. He saw your message." Sarah gasped audibly. "He saw it?" Michael nodded. "Not just saw it. He wants to help." Lena's heart clenched, her breath hitching in her throat. She had prepared herself for disappointment, but those words struck like lightning. She had spent years struggling, surviving, waiting for an answer, but never had she expected one to come from Keanu Reeves himself. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay composed. What does that mean?" Michael stood and gestured toward the SUV. "Mr. Reeves has arranged temporary housing for you and your children. A safe place where you won't have to worry about food, warmth, or security." Lena's hands trembled as she processed his words. "A home," she whispered, disbelieving. Michael nodded. "A home." Sarah grabbed her mother's arm, her grip tight. "Mama, this is real. This is really happening." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena allowed herself to believe. Kareem, still half asleep in her arms, mumbled, "Mama, is Mr. Keanu our angel?" Lena let out a choked laugh, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Maybe Habibi. Maybe his—" The drive felt surreal. Lena had spent years moving from place to place, never knowing where they would end up, and now she was sitting in a luxury car, her children safe beside her, being driven to a home. Michael turned from the passenger seat to face them. "We'll be arriving soon. Mr. Reeves wanted to meet you personally, but he's filming right now. He'll see you tomorrow." Lena still couldn't wrap her head around it. "Why is he doing this?" Michael smiled. "Because he can. And because he believes in kindness." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She had spent so long teaching herself not to cry, not to hope. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt safe enough to feel. The house was nothing short of a miracle. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood, it wasn't just a place to stay, it was a home. A beautiful, modestly furnished house with soft beds, a warm kitchen, and a stocked refrigerator. The moment Lena stepped inside, she exhaled deeply, the weight on her shoulders slowly lifting. The children ran through the halls, their laughter filling the once empty space. Sarah found the bedrooms first, gasping in disbelief. "Mama, we have real beds." Omar and Kareem jumped onto the mattress, sinking into the softness with delighted giggles. Lena, still standing in the doorway, pressed a hand to her chest. "This isn't real," she whispered. Michael, standing behind her, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It is. And it's yours." Her knees felt weak, but she steadied herself. She couldn't afford to fall apart now, not when her children were finally smiling, finally safe. She turned to Michael. "Please, tell Mr. Reeves thank you." "From the bottom of my heart." Michael smiled. "You'll get to tell him yourself. He wants to meet you tomorrow." The next day felt like a dream. Lena dressed in the first set of new clothes she had worn in years. Her children, freshly showered and dressed in warm jackets provided for them, looked like children again, not survivors of war and poverty, but kids excited for what was ahead. The car arrived again, this time taking them to a private venue. Lena's stomach churned with nerves as they stepped inside, but the moment she saw him, standing near the entrance, hands tucked into his pockets, all her fears melted away. Keanu Reeves smiled, his signature humility and kindness radiating from him as he stepped forward. "You must be Lena," he said, his voice warm. She opened her mouth to speak, but the emotions were too much. Instead, she simply nodded. Kareem, without hesitation, ran up and hugged Keanu's leg. "Are you really John Wick?" Keanu chuckled, crouching down to Kareem's level. "Sometimes. But today, I'm just Keanu." Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears. "Why did you help us?" Keanu exhaled, glancing at Lena before answering. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." His voice softened. "And because I can." Lena finally found her words. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu shook his head. "You don't have to. Just promise me one thing. She furrowed her brows. Anything. He smiled. When you're back on your feet, help someone else. That's how kindness works. Lena swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. I promise. Weeks passed. The house no longer felt temporary, it felt like home. Lena found work, the children started school, and for the first time in years, they lived without fear. Keanu continued to check in, making sure they had everything they needed. But he never asked for credit, never wanted recognition. One evening, Lena stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She glanced at the small note on the refrigerator, written in Keanu's careful handwriting. Kindness doesn't need a reason. Pass it on. And she knew that she would. Lena stood by the kitchen counter, her fingers grazing the smooth surface as she watched the simmering pot of soup on the stove. The scent of warm spices filled the air, a comforting reminder of the home she once had before war had torn it away. But now, here she was, standing in her own kitchen again, in a house she never thought she'd have. She turned and watched her children, Sarah setting the table, Amal pouring water into glasses, and little Kareem sitting at the table, happily drawing with new colored pencils Keanu had sent for him. It was surreal. Just days ago, they were sleeping in shelters, uncertain of where their next meal would come from. And now they had stability. They had warmth. They had a future. The doorbell rang and her heart jumped. She wasn't used to the idea of visitors. There had been no such thing in the refugee camp or the shelters where privacy didn't exist. Amal rushed to the door and peeked through the window before turning back, eyes wide with excitement. Mama, it's Mr. Keanu. Lena's heart raced as she wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, smoothing down the edges of her dress before opening the door. There he was, standing casually with his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, a small paper bag in one hand. His kind eyes crinkled at the edges as he smiled. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said warmly. Lena quickly shook her head. No, of course not. Please come in. She stepped aside, and Keanu entered, nodding toward the children. Hey guys. Kareem immediately ran to him, holding up his drawing. I made this for you. Keanu crouched down, taking the paper with care. The picture was simple, stick figures of Lena, Sarah, Amal, Kareem, and himself standing in front of the house. Above them, in big, shaky letters, Kareem had written, Thank you, Keanu. Keanu chuckled, his expression touched. This is amazing, buddy. You're a great artist. Kareem beamed. I'm gonna put it on the fridge. He grabbed a magnet and proudly displayed it next to the note Keanu had left them before. Lena smiled, shaking her head at her son's enthusiasm. Would you like to stay for dinner? It's nothing fancy, but I'd love to, Keanu interrupted before she could finish, placing the paper bag on the counter. But first, I brought something for dessert. I wasn't sure what you guys liked, so I got some baklava and a few other pastries. Sarah gasped. Baklava? That's our favorite. Keanu smirked. Good choice then. They sat around the table, and for the first time in years, Lena didn't feel like she was eating out of survival. She felt like she was sharing a meal with family. As they ate, Keanu listened, really listened, as Lena told him about her life before they had to flee, about how she used to be a teacher, how her husband had been an engineer, how everything had fallen apart when the war started. I just want my children to have a future, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't want them to feel like they are defined by what happened to us. Keanu nodded, setting his fork down. They won't be. They're already more than what happened to them. You all are. His words carried a weight that settled deep in Lena's heart. He didn't pity them. He saw them. After dinner, the children went to the living room, playing a game together while Lena and Keanu lingered at the table. I wanted to talk to you about something, Keanu said, leaning forward slightly. I know you used to teach back home. Have you thought about going back to it? Lena hesitated. I've thought about it, but my qualifications don't transfer here. And even if they did, I haven't taught in years. Keanu pulled something from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It was a business card. I have a friend who runs a refugee education program. They help people like you get recertified so they can teach here. Lena stared at the card, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it? She exhaled deeply, feeling a spark of possibility in her chest. "I will. Thank you, Keanu." He smiled. A month later, Lena stood outside a community center, clutching the business card in her hand. She had called the number, spoken with Keanu's friend, and now she was about to take her first step toward rebuilding her career. She entered the center, nerves twisting in her stomach. A woman greeted her warmly, guiding her through the process. By the end of the day, Lena had officially enrolled in the program that would help her regain her teaching credentials. That evening, she called Keanu. "I did it," she said, barely containing her excitement. "I signed up." Keanu's voice carried a smile. "I knew you would." Months passed, and life slowly began to take shape again. Lena studied hard, attended training sessions, and regained the confidence she had once lost. The children thrived in school, excelling in ways she had only dreamed of. Keanu visited often, not as a benefactor, but as a friend. He checked in, helped with small things, made sure they knew they weren't alone. Then, the day finally came. Lena received an official job offer to work at a local school that specialized in helping refugee children adjust to their new lives. That evening, she invited Keanu over for dinner again, but this time, she had news to share. As they sat down to eat, she placed the job offer letter in front of him. Keanu picked it up, reading it before looking up at her with a knowing smile. "You did it." Lena nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "We did it." Keanu exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I told you, this was just the beginning." Lena laughed softly. "And I promise, when I'm settled, I'll do what you asked. I'll help someone else." Keanu lifted his glass of water in a toast. "To new beginnings." They clinked glasses, and for the first time in years, Lena felt whole again. This wasn't just her new home. This was her new life. Months passed, and Lena's life took shape in ways she never imagined. What once felt like a distant dream was now her reality. She had a stable home, a steady job, and her children were thriving in school. Every morning, she woke up with purpose, no longer defined by the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for so many years. She still remembered the first day she stepped into the classroom. The scent of chalk and books brought back memories of the life she had before everything fell apart. But this time, it was different. This time, she was not just teaching, she was rebuilding. The school she worked at was unique. It was a specialized program for refugee children, kids who had gone through the same struggles her own had. Some barely spoke English, others carried deep trauma, but all of them wanted a future. And Lena? She was there to guide them through it. One afternoon, as she was packing up her materials, a young girl named Miriam approached her. She was no older than 8, her dark eyes filled with uncertainty. "Miss Lena?" she whispered. Lena crouched to her level, offering a warm smile. "Yes, Habibti?" The girl hesitated, clutching a worn notebook to her chest. "Do you think I can be a teacher like you one day?" Lena felt her heart squeeze. She saw herself in this girl, in the quiet hope flickering behind her uncertainty. She reached out, gently brushing Miriam's hair behind her ear. "I don't think so, sweetheart," she said softly. The girl's expression faltered. Lena smiled, tapping the tip of Miriam's nose. "I know you can." Miriam's face lit up, and she nodded determinedly before running off to join her classmates. Lena watched her go, swallowing the lump in her throat. This was why she had fought so hard. Not just for her own children, but for all the others who needed someone to believe in them. That evening, as she prepared dinner, her phone buzzed with a message. "Keanu, how's the new teacher life treating you?" Lena chuckled, shaking her head. Despite everything, he still checked in. "Lena, I think I found my calling again." A few seconds later, her phone rang. She picked up, putting him on speaker as she stirred the soup on the stove. "You know, most people just text back." Keanu's voice carried a smile. "Yeah, but I'm not most people." Lena laughed. "That's an understatement." "How are the kids?" he asked. Lena glanced toward the living room, where Sarah and Amal were working on their homework while Kareem lay on his stomach, doodling. "They're doing great. Kareem still insists he wants to be an artist. Sarah wants to be a journalist now. And Amal?" Lena grinned. "She says she wants to open a bakery." Keanu chuckled. "I'll be first in line when that happens." Lena exhaled, stirring the pot absent-mindedly. You know, I still wake up sometimes thinking this isn't real. It's real, Keanu said, his voice softer now. And it's just the start. Lena leaned against the counter, her voice turning more serious. I want to do more, Keanu. I don't want to just teach, I want to help people like me. Families who are still struggling to find a place here. There was a pause, and then he asked, "What do you have in mind?" Lena hesitated, but then the idea that had been lingering in her mind for weeks finally found its way out. A support center. A place where refugee families can come for help, job training, language classes, legal assistance, childcare. Somewhere they can feel safe. Keanu didn't hesitate. "Let's make it happen." Lena blinked. "What?" "I'll fund it," he said simply. "You do the planning, get the right people on board, and I'll make sure you have everything you need." Lena pressed a hand to her forehead, overwhelmed. "Keanu, I can't just let you." "Yes, you can," he interrupted. "Because I know you. And I know you're not going to stop until this happens, whether you have my help or not." Lena let out a shaky breath. He was right. Once the idea had planted itself in her mind, she knew she wouldn't be able to walk away from it. She smiled, wiping the corner of her eye. "You really are something else, Keanu. I get that a lot," he joked. "So, do we have a deal?" Lena straightened, a renewed sense of determination surging through her. "Yes, we do." The following months were a whirlwind of planning. Lena worked tirelessly, meeting with community leaders, refugee organizations, and legal advisors. With Keanu's backing, things moved faster than she ever expected. They secured a building, a warm, inviting space in the heart of the city. It was fully equipped with classrooms, counseling offices, and even a daycare area for working parents. When the grand opening arrived, the center was buzzing with people. Families filled the halls, eager to register for programs. Volunteers lined up, ready to lend their support. Lena stood at the entrance, taking it all in. It was real. It was happening. And then she saw him. Keanu walked through the doors, his signature casual look, jeans, a jacket, and that ever-present humble smile. "You actually came," she said, grinning. "Of course," he said, looking around. "This place is amazing." Lena swallowed hard, emotion bubbling in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you." Keanu shook his head. "Oh, you would have done it anyway. I just made it a little easier." A small tug on his sleeve made him look down. Kareem stood beside him, eyes wide. "Mr. Keanu, can you come see the art room?" Keanu grinned. "Lead the way, buddy." As he followed Kareem, Lena stood back, watching the life she had built unfold before her eyes. A year ago, she had held a sign on the street, begging for a miracle. Now, she was the miracle for others. And it all started with one act of kindness. The grand opening of the Refugee Support Center marked not just the beginning of a new chapter for Lena, but the start of a movement that would change the lives of thousands. Families streamed through the doors, eager to sign up for language classes, job training, and childcare services. Volunteers bustled around, handing out welcome packets and explaining the various programs. The air was electric with hope, something that had been missing from the lives of so many who had walked the same path as Lena. She stood at the entrance, watching everything unfold, her heart swelling with pride. This was it. This was the dream made real. And right in the middle of it all was Keanu Reeves. Though he had funded the center, he refused to be treated as a celebrity or a donor. Instead, he moved through the crowd like one of them, listening to stories, shaking hands, and treating everyone like they mattered. At one point, he knelt next to a young girl drawing at a small table. "What's this?" he asked, pointing at the picture she was carefully sketching. She beamed up at him. "It's a school. The one I want to go to one day." Keanu smiled. "That's a great dream." The girl nodded excitedly. "Miss Lena says we can do anything if we work hard." Keanu turned, catching Lena's eye from across the room. She smiled knowingly. "She's right," he said, ruffling the girl's hair. A growing movement. The days following the grand opening were a whirlwind. The center was at full capacity within a week, and soon, requests started pouring in from other cities asking if they could replicate the model. Lena worked tirelessly, meeting with city officials, businesses, and community leaders who wanted to bring similar programs to their own neighborhoods. And Keanu? He was still there, always checking in, always helping behind the scenes. One evening, as Lena wrapped up paperwork in her office, there was a soft knock at the door. She looked up to see Keanu, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use one," he said, setting it down in front of her. Lena sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're a lifesaver," he smirked. "I try." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their coffee as the weight of the day settled over them. Finally, Keanu spoke. "You ever stop to think about how far you've come?" Lena chuckled. "Every single day. It still doesn't feel real." Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "It's real, Lena. And it's just getting started." She exhaled, staring at the stack of papers in front of her. Proposals for expansion. Requests for new partnerships. The movement was growing faster than she ever imagined. "I want to take this beyond just one center," she admitted. "I want to build more. Help more families." Keanu nodded. "Then we do it." Lena smiled. "Just like that?" She grinned. "Just like that. Paying it forward." Months turned into a year, and before they knew it, there were 5 centers across the country. Each one was modeled after the original, offering the same resources and support that had helped Lena rebuild her life. But she wasn't content with stopping there. She started advocating on a larger scale, meeting with government officials, pushing for policy changes that would make it easier for refugee families to find stability. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, she received a call. "Keanu, you busy?" he asked. "Always," she laughed. "But for you? I can make time." "Good," he said. "Because I think it's time we celebrate." Lena frowned. "Celebrate what?" Keanu hesitated before saying, "Look outside." She stood and walked to her office window. Down below, hundreds of people stood in front of the center. Families, volunteers, students, all holding signs that read, "Thank you, Lena." Tears welled in her eyes. Keanu's voice was soft through the phone. "You've changed so many lives, Lena. It's time you let yourself see it." Lena wiped her eyes, stepping outside to meet the crowd. The moment they saw her, applause erupted. She looked around, seeing the faces of the people she had fought for, people who had once been lost, just as she had been. A little boy ran up and hugged her leg. "Miss Lena, I got into my new school today." She knelt, cupping his face. "I knew you would, Abibi." As she stood, her eyes met Keanu's from across the crowd. He didn't say anything, he just smiled, giving her a small nod. And in that moment, Lena knew. This wasn't just about her journey anymore. It was about all of them. And it was only the beginning. Lena stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces before her. It had been a year since the opening of the first refugee support center, and now she was standing at a global summit on refugee aid, preparing to address an audience filled with world leaders, activists, and CEOs, people who had the power to change the future for millions. She gripped the edges of the podium, took a steadying breath, and began. "A year ago, I stood on a street corner with my children, holding a sign, hoping that someone, anyone, would see us. Not just as refugees, not as statistics, but as people. And one person did." She paused, glancing at the front row where Keanu sat, listening intently. "Because of that one act of kindness, my children have a home. I have a career. And now we are paying it forward. But my story should not be unique. The reality is that millions of families are still waiting for their chance, waiting for someone to see them. And today, I am asking all of you to be that someone." The room was silent, hanging on to her every word. We don't need pity. We don't need temporary handouts. We need opportunity. We need programs that provide education, job placement, and pathways to self-sufficiency. We need the world to stop seeing refugees as a burden and start seeing them for what they really are: survivors, innovators, contributors. She exhaled, her voice steady. "And we can start today." The applause was deafening. As she stepped off the stage, people rushed to speak with her. Officials from different countries, CEOs who wanted to invest in refugee employment programs, philanthropists offering to fund new centers. Keanu approached her last, his signature warm smile in place. You crushed it, he said. Lena let out a breathless laugh. I think I blacked out for half of that. Keanu chuckled. Well, the world heard you loud and clear. He pulled out his phone, showing her a news article already circulating online. The headline read, "From refugee to global advocate, Lena's mission to change the world." She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of it all. I never thought I'd be here, Keanu. He put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You were always meant to be here. A movement bigger than them. The summit led to rapid expansion of the refugee support centers. Within months, new locations were opening across Europe, the Middle East, and North America. Governments began working with the initiative, integrating refugee employment programs into their policies. Companies pledged to hire displaced individuals, providing them with stable jobs and financial independence. Lena traveled constantly, meeting with leaders, speaking at conferences, making sure the movement never lost momentum. And through it all, Keanu remained a silent force behind the scenes, funding projects, connecting people, ensuring everything ran smoothly. One evening, after a particularly exhausting trip, Lena returned home to find Keanu sitting on the porch, waiting. You look like you haven't slept in a week, he teased, handing her a coffee. She groaned, collapsing into the chair beside him. Because I haven't, he smirked. The whole changing the world thing is pretty tiring, huh? She chuckled. Just a little. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Then Keanu turned to her, his expression more serious. So, what's next? Lena exhaled, staring down at her coffee. I don't know. The centers are running well, governments are stepping up, more companies are hiring refugees. But, she looked up, meeting his gaze. I want to do more. I want to make sure no child ever has to hold a sign the way mine did. No mother has to beg for safety. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. Then we build something bigger. Lena raised an eyebrow. Bigger than global refugee centers? He smiled. Yeah. An entire community. She blinked. Like, a city? Why not? Keanu leaned forward, eyes filled with conviction. A fully sustainable, self-sufficient city designed specifically for displaced families. A place where they can rebuild, thrive, and become part of society without barriers. Lena's mind raced. It sounded impossible. It sounded insane. But then again, so had everything else they'd done. She took a deep breath and smiled. Let's do it. Hope City, a new beginning. Over the next 2 years, the idea of Hope City became a reality. Located on a vast stretch of donated land, it was designed as a modern, eco-friendly, and fully functioning city, complete with housing, schools, medical facilities, job training centers, and business hubs. Keanu personally funded the early development, while international organizations and governments invested heavily in the infrastructure. It became the first city in the world built specifically to integrate displaced families into society, and the demand for similar projects skyrocketed globally. Lena walked through the streets of Hope City on the day of its grand opening, watching as families moved into their new homes, children played in the parks, and businesses began hiring their first employees. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Keanu stood beside her, looking out at the city with a proud smile. You did it, he said. Lena shook her head. We did it. Keanu chuckled. You know, when I saw that photo of you holding that sign, I had no idea it would lead to all this. Lena laughed, shaking her head. Neither did I. They stood there for a long time, watching the city come to life. Hope City wasn't just a home. It was a future. It was proof that kindness could change the world. And it all started with one act of compassion.